The moment my family found out how much money I had, they stopped treating me like a daughter and started treating me like a bank account. At least that's how it feels now. I'm 38 years old and I've spent most of my life trying not to think about my childhood. But after what happened last Thanksgiving, every memory came flooding back, and now I'm wondering if I've been looking at my family the wrong way all these years. For context, I'm the older of two sisters. Growing up, it didn't take long for me to realize that my younger sister, Emily, occupied a very different place in our parents' hearts than I did. Things weren't always that way. For the first 8 years of my life, I was an only child. My parents weren't especially affectionate, but they were involved. My mom helped me with school projects. My dad took me fishing on weekends whenever he had time. We weren't some picture-perfect family, but I never doubted that I belonged. Then Emily arrived. She was born nearly 3 months early. I didn't fully understand what that meant at the time. I just remember being woken up in the middle of the night by my aunt, who told me to pack a bag because mom was in the hospital. The next few weeks felt strange and confusing. Everyone spoke in whispers. Adults stopped explaining things. Every conversation seemed to end the moment I entered the room. When I finally met my baby sister, she looked impossibly small. Tubes covered most of her body. Machines beeped around her. The adults acted as though even breathing too close to her could be dangerous. I didn't know it then, but that was the beginning of a wall that would keep growing between me and the rest of my family for years. When Emily eventually came home, our entire house changed. Everything revolved around keeping her safe. There were disinfectant wipes everywhere. Hand sanitizer in every room. Constant cleaning. Constant warnings. Wash your hands. Don't touch that. Stay back. Even now, the smell of bleach instantly takes me back to that house. At first, I tried to be understanding. Emily had health problems. I knew that. But over time, something else started happening. Whenever I got even slightly sick, I was sent away. One sneeze. Pack a bag. A runny nose? Go stay with grandma for a week. A mild cough? My aunt's house until further notice. At first, I actually enjoyed it. My grandmother spoiled me with homemade desserts, and my aunt always had stacks of mystery novels waiting for me. But kids notice things. Eventually, I realized I wasn't being sent away because people wanted to spend time with me. I was being removed. Protected family members stay home. Potential threats get relocated. That realization hurt more than I knew how to explain at the time. So I started trying harder to earn attention. I got straight A's. Nobody seemed impressed. I won first place at my school's science competition after spending months building a project by myself. My dad's only comment was, "Can you keep it in the garage? The materials might bother Emily." I remember standing there holding the trophy, wondering if he'd even looked at it. The moment that really stuck with me happened when I was 12. I'd spent months teaching myself a difficult piano piece for the school talent showcase. Every afternoon after school, I'd practice until my fingers hurt. For once, I thought maybe my parents would come. Maybe they'd finally see me. The night of the performance, Emily developed a slight fever. Nothing serious. But that was enough. Neither of my parents showed up. I played to a room full of strangers while staring at 2 empty seats that had my parents' names on them. I tried not to cry afterward. 2 weeks later, nearly every relative we had attended Emily's beginner music recital. The performance lasted maybe 15 minutes. People brought flowers. My grandparents recorded videos. My parents couldn't stop smiling. I remember sitting in the audience and clapping along with everyone else. But for the first time, I started wondering whether there was something fundamentally wrong with me. Because no matter what I accomplished, it never seemed to matter as much as simply being Emily. As Emily got older, something changed. Or maybe nothing changed at all, except she finally realized how much power she had. By the time she was 7, most of her childhood health issues were long behind her. According to her doctors, she was doing great. According to my family, though, she was still the center of the universe. A headache meant staying home from school. Feeling tired meant someone else should handle her chores. Nervous about an exam? Mom would call teachers personally and ask for extensions. The rules that applied to everyone else somehow never applied to Emily. And she knew it. I don't even think she was always doing it consciously. When you're raised believing your comfort matters more than everyone else's, eventually it becomes your normal. Meanwhile, I was slowly disappearing into my own world. Books became my escape. Art history. Antique collections. Museum catalogs. Anything that let me imagine a life outside our house. My bedroom became a sanctuary. Partly because it was the only place that felt like mine. And partly because Emily claimed she was sensitive to the lavender air freshener I kept in there. Funny enough, it was the one excuse she made that actually benefited me. For a few hours each day, I could close my door and exist without being compared to her. Looking back, some of my happiest memories came from the times I was sent away to stay with grandma. That probably sounds terrible. Most kids want to be home with their parents. I wanted to be somewhere people noticed I existed. Grandma would ask about my day. She remembered my school projects. She listened when I talked. That shouldn't have felt special, but it did. She was also the person who introduced me to antique jewelry. Her collection wasn't particularly valuable, but every piece had a story. Some evenings we'd sit together for hours while I sorted, photographed, and cataloged old brooches, necklaces, and rings. At the time, it was just something fun we shared. I had no idea it would eventually shape my entire future. The hardest part of growing up wasn't even the favoritism. It was how everyone justified it. Every conversation followed the same script. Emily had a difficult start in life. She needs extra support. You're so mature. You're independent. You're strong. Those words sound like compliments. They're not. Sometimes independent is just a nicer way of saying nobody plans to help you. I wasn't mature. I was lonely. I was a kid trying to understand why being healthy somehow made me less important. Years later, I can see how much that mindset affected me. When nobody celebrates your accomplishments, you learn to celebrate them yourself. When nobody checks whether your homework is done, you become responsible for everything. When nobody catches you if you fall, you get very good at staying on your feet. By high school, I had one goal. Live. That's it. Every grade, every activity, every part-time job was another step toward freedom. While Emily spent most of her time creating drama and collecting sympathy, I was building an exit strategy. And honestly, it's amazing how motivated you become when failure isn't an option. The organizational habits I learned while cataloging grandma's jewelry carried over into everything. My desk looked ridiculous. Color-coded folders. Detailed study schedules. Labeled binders. Everything had a system. Emily used to laugh at me for it. "You're like a robot," she'd say. Maybe she was right. But robots don't get disappointed when people ignore them. One unexpected advantage of being overlooked is that nobody pays attention to what you're accomplishing. I joined every club I could fit into my schedule. Debate team. Student newspaper. National Honor Society. Volunteer programs. A part-time job at a local diner. That job mattered more than most people realize. The owner, Carol, remembered my birthday every year. Which was more than I could say for my own parents. The debate team became my favorite. For the first time, I discovered that I was actually good at something beyond getting grades. I loved constructing arguments. I loved thinking 3 steps ahead. I loved walking into a room full of people who underestimated me and proving them wrong. I ended up winning statewide competitions. Twice. Neither of my parents attended. Both times they had conflicts involving Emily's soccer schedule. And before anyone asks, no, she wasn't some superstar athlete. Most games she barely saw the field. Still, somehow those games always mattered more. Then came junior year. The moment that should have changed everything. I took the SAT. When the results came in, I honestly thought there had been some kind of mistake. I refreshed the page over and over. Then I checked again. And again. Perfect score. Not really good. Not top percentile. Perfect. A full 1600. I remember sitting in front of my computer for nearly 20 minutes, staring at the screen. My hands were shaking. For once, I thought maybe this would be enough. Maybe this accomplishment would finally break through. Maybe my parents would look at me and actually see me. I practically ran home. Mom was sitting at the kitchen table helping Emily with homework. I walked in holding the printout. "Mom, look." She barely glanced up. "What is it?" "I got my SAT results." "Okay." "I got a perfect score." For a split second I thought I saw surprise. Then she turned back toward Emily. "That's nice, sweetheart." Pause. "Can you keep your voice down? Your sister's trying to focus." And just like that, the moment was over. Not a hug. Not a congratulations. Not even a question. I stood there holding one of the biggest achievements of my life while they continued discussing Emily's English assignment as if I hadn't spoken at all. That should have been the moment I gave up trying to impress them. The problem was, a small part of me still hadn't learned the lesson yet. Emily didn't even look up from her homework. Some of us actually have to study, unlike Miss Perfect. Mom immediately smiled at her. "Don't worry, sweetheart. Everyone learns differently." Then she went right back to helping Emily write an essay. That was it. The entire conversation. Years later, I can still remember standing there holding those SAT results. A perfect score. One of the biggest accomplishments of my life. And somehow it had generated less excitement than one of Emily's average homework assignments. I kept a copy of that score report. Not because I was proud of it, because it reminded me of something important. No achievement was ever going to earn the validation I wanted from my family. I had to stop looking for it. At least, that was the lesson I was trying to learn. The college application process drove the point home. I handled everything myself. Every application, every essay, every recommendation request, every financial aid form. If I had questions, I asked my guidance counselor, Mr. Chin. That man probably spent more time helping me prepare for college than my parents ever did. When FAFSA paperwork became confusing, he stayed after school. When scholarship applications piled up, he helped me organize them. My parents were technically aware I was applying to colleges. They just weren't interested. Then the acceptance letters started arriving. One after another. Top schools. Major scholarships. Opportunities one hadn't even allowed myself to dream about. Each envelope felt unreal. Each email felt like another door opening. And each time, I quietly tucked the letters into a locked storage box under my bed. I didn't tell anyone. Not because I wasn't excited. Because I knew exactly what would happen. The moment Emily found out, the conversation would somehow become about her. It always did. If you leave, I'll be lonely. What if I need help? Why would you go so far away? I could practically hear the speeches before they happened. Then came the biggest letter of all. A full-ride scholarship. Tuition, housing, meal plan, books, everything covered. I remember reading the offer 3 times just to make sure I wasn't misunderstanding it. This wasn't just college. This was freedom. Ironically, that same week Emily made the junior varsity cheer squad. Guess which accomplishment got celebrated? My family went out to dinner. Photos were taken. Congratulations were posted online. Everyone talked about how proud they were. Meanwhile, I sat alone in my room eating microwaved macaroni and cheese while staring at a scholarship letter that would completely change my future. Oddly enough, I wasn't even angry. Not anymore. Mostly I felt detached. Like I was watching someone else's family. A few days later, I took the scholarship packet to my favorite spot in town. A quiet corner of the public library overlooking a small park. I sat there for almost an hour. Not studying. Not reading. Just breathing. And crying. Not because I was sad. Because for the first time in my life, I knew I had a way out. When I finally told my parents where I was going, their reactions were exactly what you'd expect. "That's really far away," Mom said. Dad frowned. "What if Emily needs you?" Then Mom added something I'll never forget. "You're not expecting us to help pay for anything, right? Emily's activities are expensive." As if I hadn't already solved that problem myself. Before I could answer, Emily jumped in. "Wait. If you're leaving, can I have your room?" I blinked. "What?" "I need more space. My videos are getting harder to film." And somehow that became the entire discussion. Not college. Not scholarships. Not my future. Bedroom square footage. By then I wasn't even surprised. The summer before college I practically lived at the diner where I worked. Double shifts. Weekend shifts. Holiday shifts. Anything that earned extra money. The owner, Carol, looked out for me more than most relatives ever had. Whenever there was leftover pie at closing, she'd pack some for me. Whenever customers left generous tips, she'd wink and say, "Looks like someone appreciates hard work." But the most valuable thing she gave me wasn't money. It was perspective. One night while we were cleaning tables, she said something that stuck with me. "People who matter don't spend all their time demanding attention." I asked what she meant. She shrugged. "In restaurants and in life, the loudest people are rarely the most important ones." At the time, I didn't fully understand. Later I would. Move-in day arrived faster than I expected. My parents couldn't come. Emily had a cheer competition. Of course she did. Instead, Aunt Kelly drove me to campus. She helped me unpack. Helped me make my tiny dorm room feel like home. Right before she left, she handed me an envelope. "This is from Grandma." Inside was $500. To some people that might not sound like much. To me it felt priceless. According to Aunt Kelly, Grandma had been setting aside money from her retirement checks for months. Little by little. Just so she'd have something to give me when I started college. I nearly cried right there in the dorm hallway. That night, after everyone else on my floor had gone to sleep, I sat alone by the window. Campus lights stretched into the distance. Everything felt unfamiliar. Terrifying. Exciting. For the first time, nobody knew my family history. Nobody saw me as Emily's sister. Nobody expected me to disappear into the background. And sitting there in the dark, I made myself a promise. I wasn't going to build a successful life to prove my family wrong. At least that's what I told myself. I was going to build it for the little girl who spent years wondering why she was never enough. College became exactly what I needed. Freedom. Long nights studying. Cheap meals. Too much coffee. Not enough sleep. The usual experience. And I loved every minute of it. When graduation finally arrived, I finished near the top of my class. Not that my parents seemed particularly interested. At the time, they were busy helping Emily navigate yet another transfer between colleges. I think it was her third school in 2 years. I'd honestly lost track. Then something happened that changed the entire direction of my life. I landed an entry-level position at a respected auction and estate appraisal company in Detroit. Nothing glamorous. My first responsibilities were mostly inventory work. Cataloging furniture. Recording household items. Sorting collections. Long hours. Low pay. Lots of paperwork. Most people would have found it boring. But I didn't. Because every day I was learning. And I had no idea that one small discovery was about to change everything. For the first year at the auction house, I mostly kept my head down. I was still the new employee. The youngest person on several projects. The one expected to take notes, organize files, and stay out of the way. Then came the Whitmore estate. An elderly widow had passed away without any direct heirs, leaving behind a sprawling house packed with antiques, collectibles, and boxes of jewelry that everyone assumed were costume pieces. Most of the senior appraisers barely glanced at them. I almost didn't either. Almost. One afternoon, while sorting through trays of brooches and necklaces, something caught my eye. It wasn't flashy. No giant diamonds. No dramatic design. Just a small geometric brooch tucked into a corner. But something felt off. The weight. The craftsmanship. The clasp mechanism. Years of handling Grandma's collection had taught me one thing. Sometimes the most valuable pieces are the ones nobody notices. I slipped the brooch into a separate tray and spent my lunch break researching it. Then another lunch break. Then another. The deeper I dug, the stranger things became. Every clue pointed toward the same conclusion. This wasn't costume jewelry. It only looked like costume jewelry. The problem? I was still the rookie. If I marched into my boss's office claiming I'd discovered a hidden treasure everyone else had missed, I'd sound ridiculous. So I did what years of debate competitions had trained me to do. I built a case. Every photograph. Every hallmark. Every historical reference. Every comparable piece I could find. For nearly 2 weeks, I researched before work, during lunch, and late into the evening. I even spent money I couldn't really afford on specialized training courses. By the time I was finished, I knew more about that piece than some museum curators probably did. Finally, I gathered my courage and walked into my supervisor's office. He barely looked up. "What is it, Claire?" I placed a folder on his desk. "I think one of the pieces from the Whitmore estate may have been misidentified." He sighed. "We already finished cataloging that collection." "I know." He reached for his coffee. "Then what's the issue?" I opened the file. "Look at the maker's marks." For the first time, he actually paid attention. 10 minutes later, he was calling in another appraiser. 2 weeks after that, the piece went to auction. Final sale price? $47,000. I still remember staring at the numbers after the sale closed. It felt unreal. Not because of the money. Because for the first time in my life, somebody had listened when I spoke. After that, things started changing. Slowly at first. Then all at once. Management began sending unusual pieces my way. Questions landed on my desk. People started asking for my opinion. The hobby that had once helped me survive lonely afternoons at Grandma's house suddenly became a legitimate career. And I threw myself into it completely. Every spare dollar went toward education. Every weekend became research time. I attended estate sales for fun. Read industry journals before bed. Filled notebooks with authentication techniques and historical references. My apartment looked less like a normal living space and more like an investigation board. Photographs. Research notes. Auction records. Reference books stacked everywhere. Most people would have called it obsessive. Maybe it was. But for the first time, I had something that belonged entirely to me. Not my parents. Not Emily. Me. The effort paid off. I started spotting valuable pieces others overlooked. Built relationships with collectors. Developed a reputation for thoroughness. My commissions grew larger every year. And for the first time in my adult life, I wasn't living paycheck to paycheck. I was building savings. Real savings. Not that my family cared. For some reason, I still attended Sunday dinners. Looking back, I'm not sure why. Maybe hope dies slowly. Maybe part of me still wanted approval. Whatever the reason, the conversations never changed. Still working at that little antique place? Mom would ask. It's an auction house. Oh, right. One Sunday, I mentioned that I'd recently authenticated a rare designer jewelry piece. Something collectors had been searching for years. Before I could finish the story, Emily interrupted. You guys have to see this bracelet I bought at the mall. The entire table immediately turned toward her. Conversation over. Nobody even noticed. Oddly enough, it didn't hurt anymore. At some point, I'd stopped expecting them to care. My success no longer depended on their approval. And that made me dangerous. Then came the collection that changed everything. Even now, people in the industry still talk about it. The Bennett estate. Old money. Generational wealth. The kind of collection that makes headlines before it's even cataloged. Everyone at the company wanted to be involved. The pressure was enormous. 4 weeks, our team worked 12-hour days documenting thousands of items. Most of it was exactly what you'd expect. Expensive. Rare. Predictable. Then I found something strange. It was hidden among several pieces that had already been classified. Nothing about it screamed valuable. In fact, it looked surprisingly ordinary. Which immediately made me suspicious. I spent 3 days researching it. 3 days with almost no sleep. 3 days double-checking every detail because I knew how unbelievable the conclusion sounded. The evidence kept pointing in the same direction. If I was right, the piece wasn't merely rare. It was thought to be lost forever. A legendary item connected to a famous European jeweler whose private collection had partially disappeared during World War II. I was terrified of being wrong. But I was even more terrified of ignoring it. When the piece finally went to auction, the room was packed. Collectors flew in from multiple countries. Phones rang non-stop. Bidding escalated faster than anyone expected. I remember sitting there trying to stay calm while my heart hammered against my ribs. The final hammer price landed at $238,000. The room erupted. And in that moment, everything changed. Because after that sale, people stopped seeing me as a promising employee. They started seeing me as an expert. And experts get opportunities. The kind of opportunities that can completely alter the course of a life. A few days after the Bennett estate auction, my supervisor called me into his office. I assumed I was finally getting promoted. At that point, I'd been bringing significant value to the company for years. A raise seemed reasonable. Instead, he said something I never expected. Claire, you're wasting your talent here. I laughed. That's not usually how promotion conversations start. He didn't laugh back. I'm serious. Then he leaned forward. You should start your own business. For a moment, I honestly thought he was joking. My own business? With what money? What investors? What safety net? People like me didn't start companies. People like me worked for people who started companies. At least that's what I believed back then. But the idea refused to leave. For weeks, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Eventually, I started taking small freelance authentication projects after work. Nothing major. A collector wanting a second opinion. A dealer needing documentation. An attorney handling an estate. 1 client became 2. 2 became 5. 5 became 10. The work kept growing. One evening, I was sitting alone in my tiny apartment surrounded by books, reference materials, and authentication equipment I'd collected over the years. The place looked more like a research lab than a living room. And suddenly, a thought hit me. What if he's right? What if I can actually do this? The next few months were either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. Possibly both. I emptied my savings, took out a loan, signed a lease I could barely afford, and opened my own authentication firm. My first office was objectively terrible. It was a converted storage space above a restaurant. The room was barely larger than a college dorm. The internet only worked consistently if I sat near one specific window. And every afternoon the entire office smelled like garlic, soy sauce, and whatever special the restaurant was serving downstairs. But it was mine. For the first time in my life, I wasn't building someone else's future. I was building my own. The early months were terrifying. I don't think people talk enough about how scary entrepreneurship actually is. Every bill felt personal. Every expense felt catastrophic. I'd wake up at 3 a.m. calculating worst-case scenarios. What if clients stopped calling? What if I couldn't make loan payments? What if everyone realized I had no idea what I was doing? My office furniture was equally glamorous. A folding table, a second-hand filing cabinet, and a chair I rescued from a curbside trash pile. After disinfecting it thoroughly, of course. Looking back, it was ridiculous. At the time, it felt like everything. Fortunately, reputation matters in specialized industries. And despite my tiny office, I had something valuable. People trusted my work. I started by helping local dealers and small collectors. My rates were lower than larger firms, but my reports were meticulous. Clients noticed. Then came my first real breakthrough. A dealer I'd worked with years earlier called about a private collection. Several generations of inherited jewelry. Hundreds of pieces. The owner wanted an expert review before selling anything. I spent nearly 2 weeks on that project. Long days. Longer nights. Coffee became a food group. The deeper I dug, the more interesting the collection became. Most pieces were exactly what everyone expected. Then I found 2 items that had been incorrectly identified for decades. What had been dismissed as reproductions turned out to be rare originals. The discovery dramatically increased the collection's value. The client was thrilled. When everything sold, she paid my fee. Then she paid something else. A percentage of the final sale. The amount was life-changing. More money than I'd earned during several previous years combined. I remember staring at the deposit notification in disbelief. I refreshed my banking app 5 times because I thought there had to be an error. There wasn't. That project changed everything. Suddenly my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Collectors started referring friends. Estate attorneys began calling. Dealers reached out for consultations. Even my former employer started sending occasional work my way. I never asked if my old boss was helping behind the scenes. But I always suspected he was. Business grew faster than I expected. By the 2nd year, I hired my first employee. Her name was Natalie. Fresh out of a gemology program. Brilliant. Quiet. Frequently underestimated. In other words, she reminded me of myself. Most people overlooked her. I didn't. Today she's one of the most talented experts I've ever worked with. The company kept expanding. We moved into a real office downtown. A professional one. With reliable internet. No restaurant smells. No folding tables. No rescued furniture. I hired specialists. Built partnerships. Expanded our services. Before long, we developed a reputation for uncovering valuable pieces others missed. The irony wasn't lost on me. My entire career had been built around recognizing overlooked things. Maybe that's why I was good at it. I knew exactly what being overlooked felt like. As the business grew, so did the money. Not overnight. Not in some movie-style miracle. Year after year. Client after client. Deal after deal. Slow, steady growth. The kind people rarely notice until suddenly it looks like success happened instantly. There was just one complication. My family still had absolutely no idea. Part of that was intentional. I never lied. I just stopped explaining. Whenever they asked about work, I'd give simple answers. It's going well. Busy. Lots of projects. Nobody ever asked follow-up questions. They weren't interested enough. As far as my parents and Emily knew, I still worked in some small antique-related job. Honestly, it was easier that way. At family dinners, Emily occasionally made little comments. The kind that were technically jokes but weren't really jokes. "Hey Claire," she'd say, "I found some old jewelry in my closet. Maybe your little shop wants donations." Everyone would laugh. I'd smile politely. And say nothing. What she didn't know was that earlier that same week I'd helped authenticate a collection worth more than most houses. But correcting her seemed pointless. Let her think whatever she wanted. The less attention my finances attracted, the better. At least that's what I believed at the time. I had no idea that keeping my success quiet was only delaying a much bigger explosion. Because eventually, somebody was going to find out exactly how successful I'd become. And when they did, everything in my family would change. The funny thing is that my family remained completely unaware of how much my life had changed. And after a while, keeping it that way became entertaining. Not in a cruel way. More like an ongoing social experiment. Every Sunday, I'd show up for dinner dressed as the version of me they expected to see. Nothing flashy. Nothing that would attract attention. Simple clothes. Comfortable shoes. The same quiet daughter they'd spent years overlooking. Meanwhile, my actual life looked very different. Earlier that same week, I might have been negotiating with international collectors. Reviewing 7-figure transactions. Or consulting on pieces that belonged in museums. But none of that existed in my parents' minds. To them, I still worked with old jewelry or something. That's literally how my mother introduced me once. My other daughter works with antiques. My other daughter. Not my name. Not my company. Not my accomplishments. Just, my other daughter. I almost laughed. Especially because around that same time, one of my interviews had been featured in a major business publication. Granted, the article focused on the company rather than me personally. Still, it was surreal. Industry professionals recognized my work immediately. My own family couldn't have picked my business logo out of a lineup. Eventually, I started turning the situation into a private game. Nothing malicious, just harmless amusement. I'd wear valuable vintage pieces to family gatherings and see if anyone noticed. Nobody ever did. One Christmas, Emily spent 20 minutes bragging about an expensive designer watch she'd purchased on sale. Everyone admired it, passed it around, complimented her taste. The entire time, I was wearing a rare vintage timepiece worth more than most people's cars. Not a single person noticed. I remember driving home afterward laughing so hard I nearly missed my exit. The company itself kept growing. By year 5, we'd expanded into multiple cities. Our client list had become impressive enough that even I occasionally struggled to believe it. Collectors, museums, estate attorneys, private wealth managers, people whose names rarely appeared in public. The larger we became, the more valuable discretion became. Many wealthy clients cared less about publicity than privacy. And privacy paid extremely well. For the first time in my life, I had more money than I knew what to do with. That sounds ridiculous to say out loud, especially considering how I grew up. But it was true. I hired financial advisors, accountants, investment professionals, people who understood wealth better than I did. Because despite the growing numbers in my accounts, I still thought like the kid who worried about affording textbooks. Oddly enough, success didn't transform me into some luxury-obsessed millionaire. My lifestyle stayed relatively simple. I bought a comfortable house. Not a mansion. A nice car. Not a supercar. Most of my spending went toward things related to work. Research equipment. Security systems. Specialized tools. Infrastructure. Things most people would find incredibly boring. If my family had seen my financial statements, they probably would have fainted. Instead, they assumed I was struggling. And I never corrected them. "Claire's always been responsible," Mom would say. "She's probably saving every penny." I'd nod politely. The truth was that a single successful authentication project sometimes generated more income than they earned in years. But what would have been the point of saying that? Success becomes difficult to explain to people who've already decided who you are. My family had spent decades viewing me through one specific lens. The overlooked daughter. The quiet one. The independent one. The one who didn't need much. No amount of money was going to rewrite that story in their heads. At least not voluntarily. So every Sunday I continued playing my role. And honestly, the contrast was becoming absurd. My mornings involved conference calls with international clients. My afternoons involved evaluating collections worth millions. My evenings involved sitting at my parents' dining table listening to Emily explain how important she was becoming at her marketing job. Most of her stories sounded remarkably similar. Someone praised her presentation. Someone complimented her idea. Someone appreciated her effort. Every story received enthusiastic attention. Questions. Encouragement. Applause. The usual. One particular Sunday stands out more than the others. Earlier that day, I'd completed one of the biggest deals of my career. A long-lost luxury piece had been sitting unnoticed in a private vault for decades. The authentication process had taken months. The final commission alone was more money than I'd imagined earning in an entire year when I first started my company. I arrived at dinner still riding the emotional high. Not because of the money. Because I was proud. Proud of the work. Proud of the team. Proud of what we'd built. Mom took one look at me and frowned. "Honey, are you doing okay financially?" I blinked. "What?" She gestured toward my sweater. "You've been wearing the same things forever. You should buy yourself something nice." I nearly choked. The sweater she was criticizing cost more than her monthly mortgage payment. But it was intentionally understated. No visible logos. No flashy branding. Exactly the kind of thing people ignore unless they know what they're looking at. "I'm fine," I said. "Just trying to be practical." Emily laughed. Then she said something that perfectly captured how my family viewed me. "Maybe if you got a real job instead of playing with old jewelry all day, you wouldn't have to worry so much." Everyone chuckled. Even Dad smiled. Nobody defended me. Nobody questioned the comment. Nobody considered that maybe they had absolutely no idea what my life actually looked like. I smiled, took a sip of water, and said nothing. Because what was I supposed to say? That my little jewelry hobby employed dozens of people? That my company was expanding again? That I'd earn more that month than Emily made all year? I kept quiet. But sitting there listening to everyone laugh, I had a strange feeling. For years being ignored had hurt. Now it felt different. Now it felt dangerous. because eventually the truth was going to come out. And when it did, the people who had spent decades underestimating me were going to react in ways none of us could predict. The only thing I didn't realize yet was just how explosive that reaction would be. Emily smirked after her comment. My dad chuckled and shook his head. Come on, Emily. Be nice. Then he added the part that nearly made me choke on my food. Not everyone ends up as successful as you. I had to take a sip of water just to keep a straight face. The irony was unbelievable. At that exact moment, I was quietly funding part of the family's survival. And they had no idea. The anonymous payments had started about a year earlier. My aunt called one evening and mentioned that my parents were struggling financially. Medical expenses, debt, student loans they'd taken on to help Emily. The possibility of losing the house I'd grown up in. For some reason, that bothered me more than I expected. Despite everything, it was still home. So I decided to help. Quietly. No recognition. No explanations. No conditions. I arranged an anonymous monthly transfer into my parents' account. $5,000 every month. Enough to stabilize things without attracting too much attention. At least that was the plan. The money immediately changed their situation. Bills stopped piling up. Collection notices disappeared. The panic eased. But it also created a strange new dynamic. My parents became convinced I was sacrificing everything to help the family. They assumed I was surviving on instant noodles and working overtime just to contribute. Mom would look at me with this expression that mixed guilt and admiration. You're such a good daughter. The weird thing? She wasn't thanking me for what I was actually doing. She was thanking an imaginary version of me she'd created in her head. Meanwhile, Emily seemed to be doing better financially than ever. Every few weeks she showed up with something new. Designer handbags. Weekend trips. Luxury cosmetics. Expensive accessories. Whenever someone asked about the money, she'd shrug. Oh, I found a great deal. Sure. I work in luxury goods. I know the difference between an outlet purchase and a $5,000 handbag. The timing wasn't exactly subtle. Part of me strongly suspected that some of the money indirectly intended to help the family was funding Emily's lifestyle instead. I never said anything. Maybe I should have. Maybe that was my mistake. At the time, staying silent felt easier. Then came the MBA situation. Emily decided she wanted to go back to school. Not a local university. Not an affordable option. A prestigious private program with tuition costs that made even me blink twice. My mother called me crying. We don't know how we're going to afford it. I tried being practical. What about a state school? There are great programs closer to home. Silence. Then Mom sighed. Honey, you don't understand. Emily needs the right environment. The right environment. Of course she did. Somehow every expensive decision became a necessity when it involved Emily. A few days later, I increased the anonymous transfers. $7,000 a month. The amount barely affected my finances. Emotionally, though, that was different. Watching my parents praise Emily's determination while unknowingly using my money to support her dreams felt complicated. I wasn't angry exactly. Just tired. Tired of existing in two completely separate realities. There was another layer of absurdity. Around that same time, I was invited to speak at a graduate business program. The dean personally reached out after hearing about my company's growth. They wanted me to give a guest lecture about entrepreneurship, luxury markets, and building specialized businesses. The funny part? It was the same university Emily was considering for her MBA. I spent an hour figuring out how to explain my absence from Sunday dinner without revealing why I was actually there. That was becoming a recurring theme. My real life felt increasingly disconnected from my family life. During the week, I managed a company generating millions in revenue. I met investors, negotiated contracts, spoke at industry events. On Sundays, I returned to being the daughter everyone pitied. The one with the little antique job. The one who supposedly struggled financially. The double life was becoming exhausting. And deep down, I think I knew it couldn't continue forever. Secrets rarely stay buried. Especially family secrets. The pressure kept building. Every joke about my career. Every condescending comment. Every conversation where Emily's achievements were celebrated while mine were ignored. Each one added another brick to a wall that was already cracking. Then Thanksgiving arrived. And everything exploded. Looking back, the signs were obvious. The truth had been trying to come out for years. Thanksgiving just happened to be the day the dam finally broke. Ironically, it started because my mother called asking for help. 2 weeks before the holiday, she phoned me in tears. Her back problems had gotten worse. The doctor had diagnosed a herniated disc. The thought of cooking a huge Thanksgiving dinner for the entire family was overwhelming. I offered a solution almost immediately. Why don't I handle the food this year? There was a pause. What do you mean? I'll arrange catering. Mom sounded horrified. Catering? Claire, we can't afford that. I almost laughed. If only she knew. Don't worry about the cost. Another pause. Then came the question. You're not putting yourself into debt for this, are you? That one stung. Because in her mind, helping the family was something I could only accomplish through personal sacrifice. The possibility that I could comfortably afford it never even crossed her mind. No, I said. Everything's fine. Let me take care of it. I hired the same catering company I occasionally used for corporate events. Professional service. Excellent food. Nothing outrageous. Just nice. The entire arrangement was supposed to make everyone's lives easier. Simple. Stress-free. A good holiday. Instead, it became the first domino in a chain reaction that would eventually expose every secret I'd spent years hiding. And once the first domino fell, there was no stopping what came next. Thanksgiving morning actually started off pretty well. For once, nobody was arguing. Nobody was competing for attention. And thanks to the catering company I'd hired, nobody was going to suffer through another dry turkey. The food was incredible. The kind of meal that makes people stop talking after the first bite. Everything arrived on time. Everything looked perfect. The entire order probably cost more than my parents believed I earned in a couple of months, but I didn't think much about it. I was more focused on work. Unfortunately, work never completely stops when you own a company. A major international auction was taking place that day, and one of my clients was interested in a rare piece that might require immediate authentication if they won the bidding. So I brought my laptop. I figured I'd check in occasionally between conversations and dessert. Simple. At least that was the plan. The meal itself went surprisingly well. Mom kept apologizing for not cooking. Everyone kept assuring her it was fine. Even Emily seemed impressed. Though naturally she couldn't resist making a comment. Store-bought stuffing? She said with a smirk. Mom's is better. This from the woman who once burned toast badly enough to trigger the smoke detectors. A few bites later, she mysteriously stopped complaining. Funny how that works. After dinner, while everyone settled into conversations and pie, I slipped upstairs to check the auction. The bidding had become intense. Millions of dollars were moving around in real time. I opened several reports. Reviewed a few contracts. Answered a couple of emails. The usual. I was sitting in my old bedroom. The same bedroom that looked almost identical to how it had when I left for college. Mom had barely changed anything. Ironically, Emily's room had been remodeled multiple times over the years. New furniture. New paint. New layouts. But mine remained frozen in time. I should have seen the symbolism sooner. Then the door opened. No knock. No warning. Just Emily. Some things never change. I need a charger, she announced. Then her eyes landed on my laptop screen. I knew immediately something was wrong. The expression on her face changed. Curiosity. Confusion. Then excitement. The kind of excitement someone gets when they think they've found leverage. Oh my God. Before I could react, she stepped closer. What is all this? It's work. That should have ended the conversation. Instead, it made things worse. Emily grabbed the laptop. Actually grabbed it. Then she turned and walked downstairs. Everyone needs to see this. My stomach dropped. For the first time all day, I felt genuine panic. Not because I was ashamed. Because I knew exactly how this was going to end. I followed her into the dining room. 20 people looked up. Aunts, uncles, cousins, parents, everyone. Emily stood at the head of the table like she was about to reveal some enormous secret. I could tell what she thought was happening. She assumed she'd discovered evidence proving her older sister wasn't nearly as successful as she claimed. Maybe some embarrassing side business. Maybe financial problems. Maybe something she could mock. Instead, she turned the screen around and froze. The room went silent. Not regular silence. The kind of silence that feels physical. I remember hearing the ticking of a clock somewhere in the house. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Every pair of eyes stared at the screen. Current investment balance. Company accounts. Pending contracts. Revenue reports. Transaction summaries. Numbers. Lots of numbers. Very large numbers. Emily's face went completely white. Her mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. Then she whispered, "This can't be real." Mom laughed. Actually laughed. "Oh, stop it." She waved her hand dismissively. "Claire works with antiques. Emily didn't look away from the screen. Her voice cracked. "No, Mom." Silence. Then, "Claire's rich." The room exploded. Questions started flying immediately. "What are we looking at? How much is that? Is this a business account? Wait, what company?" For a few seconds I just stood there. Part of me wanted to laugh. Part of me wanted to leave. Instead I took a deep breath and told the truth. "I own an authentication firm." Nobody said anything. "I've owned it for years." More silence. "We have offices in several cities." Dad stared at me. Mom stared at me. Emily looked like someone had physically slapped her. I kept going. "I authenticate rare jewelry and luxury collections." One cousin blinked. "Like, expensive jewelry?" "Very expensive jewelry." The room became quiet again. Then Dad nearly choked on his drink. My aunt dropped her fork. Someone actually whispered, "Holy crap." For one brief moment I thought maybe this would finally be different. Maybe there would be congratulations, questions, pride, recognition. Maybe. Instead, Mom stood up so quickly her chair tipped backward. Her face had gone bright red. And the first words out of her mouth were, "You have all that money and you let us struggle?" Not, "I'm proud of you." Not, "Congratulations." Not, "How did you build that?" That. I stared at her. Confused. "What?" "You knew we needed help." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "I send money every month." The room went still again. Mom's expression didn't change. $7,000 isn't enough when you're sitting on millions. There it was. The moment everything finally clicked. The money wasn't the problem. The amount was. No matter what I'd done, it would never have been enough. Then Emily started crying. Right on schedule. Huge tears. Shaking voice. The full performance. "You lied to us." I almost laughed. What? They'd spent years making assumptions about my life without ever asking a single question. Dad joined in. His disappointment seemed genuine. "How could you keep this from your family?" Family. Interesting word. Especially coming from people who couldn't remember my achievements unless they somehow involved Emily. Something inside me finally snapped. Years of ignored accomplishments. Years of dismissal. Years of hearing that Emily deserved more attention. More support. More understanding. More everything. All of it came rushing to the surface at once. And for the first time in my life, I stopped trying to keep the peace. I stopped smiling. I stopped being polite. And I told them exactly what I thought. The worst part? I wasn't even angry anymore. I was tired. And tired people sometimes tell the truth more brutally than angry people ever could. "Raised you?" I finally snapped. Years of frustration came pouring out before I could stop myself. "Is that what we're calling it now?" The room went silent. I didn't. "You sent me away every time I got sick because Emily was supposedly fragile. You missed my competitions. My awards. My graduation ceremonies. You never saved $1 for my education, but somehow found money to support every one of her dreams." Mom looked stunned. Dad looked angry. Emily looked offended. As if I was the one being unreasonable. "And now," I continued, "you're furious because I built something for myself?" The next few minutes were complete chaos. Everyone started talking at once. Mom was shouting about family responsibility. Dad was lecturing me about gratitude. Emily kept bouncing between tears and demands to know exactly how much money I had. Meanwhile, the catering staff stood awkwardly in the corner holding trays of dessert and pretending not to hear any of it. I almost felt bad for them. Almost. Eventually I'd had enough. I grabbed my laptop. Picked up my handbag. The same handbag Mom had once complimented as a really convincing fake. Then I walked out. As I headed toward the door, I overheard something that made me stop for half a second. They were already discussing how to spend my money. Not asking. Planning. Emily's MBA. A newer car. A better house. A vacation. The conversation sounded less like a family discussion and more like a budgeting meeting. For assets they didn't own. I left. And for the first time in years I didn't look back. The drive home was strangely peaceful. My phone wasn't. By the time I reached my driveway, notifications were arriving faster than I could read them. Missed calls. Text messages. Voicemails. Social media alerts. The family group chat had become a war zone. My mother alone sent dozens of messages. The progression was honestly impressive. First came outrage. Then guilt. Then negotiation. Then entitlement. Then outrage again. At one point she actually texted, "We need to discuss what would be fair." Fair. Interesting choice of words. especially considering nobody had ever been particularly concerned about fairness when I was growing up. Emily took a different approach. She went public. Within 24 hours she'd posted a lengthy social media rant. According to her version of events, she'd just discovered that her millionaire sister had secretly hidden her wealth while allowing her poor family to suffer. The comments section exploded. People I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly became experts on my moral obligations. Second cousins, former classmates, random acquaintances. Everyone had an opinion. Very few had facts. The part that hurt wasn't the criticism. It was the rewriting of history. Emily claimed she'd always supported my career. Always encouraged me. Always believed in me. I stared at my phone wondering if she'd somehow confused me with another sibling. The only professional advice I could remember receiving from her was a suggestion that I sell jewelry online as a hobby. Apparently, that now qualified as mentorship. Then came the flying monkeys. If you've dealt with toxic family dynamics, you know exactly what I mean. Suddenly people I barely knew were contacting me. An aunt I saw once every few years called to explain that family comes first. An uncle I hadn't spoken to in ages sent me a long email about sharing blessings. Some distant relative somehow found my number and left a voicemail about honoring my parents. It was exhausting. But nothing prepared me for Monday morning. I arrived at the office expecting a normal workday. Instead, Natalie met me near the entrance with a look of pure disbelief. "Your family is here." I froze. "What?" She pointed toward reception. There they were. Mom, Dad, Emily, sitting comfortably in the waiting area as if they belonged there. Apparently, they'd told the receptionist they were clients. For a moment, I genuinely considered turning around and leaving. Instead, I walked over. My mother immediately stood up. "There you are." Not hello. Not good morning. Just there you are. Like I was an employee running late. Emily sat clutching her designer handbag while looking around my office with open fascination. The expensive artwork. The security systems. The conference rooms. All the things she'd never bothered asking about before. Mom folded her hands. "We had a family meeting." I couldn't help myself. "A family meeting about me without me?" She ignored the question. "We've discussed everything." That was never a good sign. "And?" Mom smiled. The kind of smile people use when they think they're being reasonable. "We think it's only fair that you establish trust funds for everyone." I actually laughed. Not intentionally. The absurdity simply escaped. Then Emily jumped in. "I'll need at least $2 million. Meet. Not what? Meet. To get my life started properly." Properly. Of course. Dad cleared his throat. "Your mother and I have been talking about retirement." I already knew where this was going. "We'd like a beach house." Naturally. For a moment I just stared at them, trying to understand whether this conversation was real. Whether they genuinely believed they were entitled to dictate how my money should be spent. Finally, I asked the obvious question. "Did all of you somehow forget that I've been sending $7,000 every month for years?" Emily rolled her eyes. "That's nothing compared to what you have." "Nothing. Thousands of dollars every month. Years of support." "Nothing." Then she said the part I'll never forget. "You owe us." The room became very quiet. I looked at her. Then at my parents. Then back at her. "I owe you." "Yes." "For what exactly?" Nobody answered. So I did. "The years of being ignored?" Silence. "The graduations you skipped?" Silence. "The awards nobody cared about?" More silence. "The fact that I paid for my own education while you financed everything for Emily?" Mom sighed dramatically. The way people do when they're tired of hearing inconvenient truths. "Oh, Claire." Her voice was dripping with irritation. "Stop being so dramatic." And right then, sitting in my own office, listening to the people who had overlooked me for decades explain why I owed them millions of dollars, I realized something. They weren't shocked by my success. They weren't proud of it. They weren't even interested in how I'd achieved it. To them, my success only mattered because they believed it belonged to them. And that realization changed everything. "We gave you everything." My mother's voice echoed through the reception area. For a second, I almost questioned myself. Almost. Then years of memories came flooding back. Being sent away whenever Emily caught a cold. Empty seats at my award ceremonies. Birthday dinners forgotten. Scholarships celebrated by nobody. The answer became very clear. "No," I said quietly. Everyone stopped talking. I looked directly at my parents. I gave myself everything. The silence was immediate. Then I added the part that surprised even me. "And I'm done." No shouting. No dramatic speech. Just done. Right there in the lobby of the company I'd spent years building. I pulled out my phone, opened my banking app, and canceled the monthly transfers. The recurring payments disappeared with a few taps. That was it. No more $7,000 every month. No more anonymous support. No more funding people who believed they were entitled to my success. Mom gasped. You would have thought I'd physically attacked her. Emily immediately launched into another crying fit. At first. Then she noticed nobody was reacting. The tears slowed down surprisingly fast. Funny how that works. What happened next was uglier. They refused to leave. At first they argued. Then they demanded. Then they threatened. Eventually, building security became involved. Watching my 60-year-old mother being escorted toward the exit while yelling about selfish children was one of the strangest moments of my life. Not sad. Not satisfying. Just strange. Natalie walked into my office afterward. Do you want to press charges? I thought about it, then shook my head. No. I wasn't interested in revenge. I was interested in peace. I did, however, have all three of them permanently added to the building's restricted access list. Small difference. Important difference. Unfortunately, they didn't stop. For weeks, the harassment continued. Blocked numbers. New numbers. Fake email accounts. Messages through social media. Messages through business accounts. At one point, someone even tried contacting me through my company's customer support system. That was when I finally hired an attorney. The legal notice was simple. Stop contacting me, or the next step becomes official harassment claims. That finally got their attention. Well, most of their attention. My mother still had one final move. She called Grandma Evelyn. And honestly, I think she expected backup. Instead, she got something else entirely. Because Grandma Evelyn had watched everything unfold for decades. She knew exactly what happened. She knew exactly how I grew up. And unlike everyone else, she never pretended otherwise. When Mom explained the situation, Grandma reportedly laughed. Then said, "Good for her." Apparently Mom was stunned. Grandma continued, "It's about time somebody in this family succeeded on her own terms." According to my aunt, Mom hung up shortly afterward. The two of them barely spoke for months. I sent Grandma flowers. The biggest bouquet I could find. 6 months have passed since Thanksgiving. A lot has changed. I moved. Not because I was afraid. Because privacy suddenly became very important. The new house has better security. Better gates. Fewer opportunities for surprise visits. I changed my phone numbers. Updated personal information. Made a clean break. As for the business, ironically it's doing better than ever. Several clients heard about the situation through mutual contacts. Turns out wealthy people appreciate discretion. And they especially appreciate someone who knows how to protect personal information. Who knew family drama could become a networking opportunity. Emily, meanwhile, continues posting vague social media updates. Things about betrayal. Family loyalty. Greedy people. Hidden wealth. Every few weeks somebody forwards one to me. I never respond. From what I've heard, she's planning to start her own luxury authentication business. Honestly, I wish her luck. She's going to need it. Because identifying luxury goods requires something she never bothered developing. Expertise. My parents eventually stopped trying to contact me after receiving a second letter from my attorney. Now they tell people they never wanted my money. Apparently they've chosen a new narrative. According to relatives, they're praying for me. Which is fine. People can tell themselves whatever story helps them sleep at night. As for me, for the first time in my entire life I feel free. No more Sunday dinners where every achievement gets minimized. No more pretending to be smaller so someone else can feel bigger. No more funding the Emily show. No more hiding. My therapist says I've finally established healthy boundaries. Maybe she's right. Personally, I think I've finally stopped apologizing for existing. That's the real difference. I won't pretend this was easy. They're still my family. Sometimes I miss the idea of what we could have been. Sometimes I wonder whether I should have revealed the truth sooner. Or maybe never revealed it at all. But then I remember what happened the moment they learned about my success. Not pride. Not happiness. Not love. Entitlement. And that reminds me why I walked away. One final update. Grandma Evelyn is doing great. She's coming to visit next month. We're planning to spend a weekend cataloging a newly acquired private collection together. Honestly, I'm looking forward to it more than any holiday I've had in years. And since I know my sister probably still checks anything related to me online. Emily, the bracelet in your latest vacation photos? The one you've been calling vintage luxury? It's a counterfeit. A pretty convincing one. but definitely counterfeit. Old habits die hard. So anyway, that's my story. Maybe I should have been more honest sooner. Maybe I should have stopped sending money years ago. Or maybe cutting them off completely was too extreme. I genuinely don't know. AITA for exposing the truth, cutting off my family and refusing to fund their lives anymore?